Hey podcast fans, Paul Lukas from Unified here. Now I'm guessing you probably have plenty of caps featuring the logos of your favorite teams, but Aced Out is the officially licensed cap that lets you show your love for specific Major League Baseball players. They have caps you won't find anywhere else, saluting today's hottest stars like Mike Trout, Fernando Tatis Jr., and Jacob deGrom, and their designs are available in a variety of styles, from snapbacks to dad caps. Aced Out also has a collection of super soft tri-blend t-shirts officially licensed by the Baseball Hall of Fame, paying tribute to immortal players like Frank Thomas, Tom Seaver, George Brett, Johnny Bench, and Cal Ripken Jr. These caps and shirts are not available in stores or on any other websites. You can only get them at acedout.com. And you can save 20% off your first order by using the checkout code UNIFIED. That's acedout.com. And use the checkout code UNIFIED for 20% off your first order.
Hello. Welcome to the Unified Show. I'm your co-host, Chris Creamer from SportsLogos.Net. Joining me, as always, my co-host from UniWatch, Paul Lukas. Today, our first episode in a month, of course. We're on our monthly schedule, once again enjoying the warm weather outside. Although, yeah, we'd love to talk to you guys too as well, but we need a little bit of warm weather for ourselves. This episode, we are going to talk about that train wreck that was the Major League Baseball All-Star Game uniforms. You all saw it. You know what we're talking about it, but we'll dive into it a little bit more. And then we're going to talk about, our main topic this week is kids these days, or the subtitle that Paul sent me and I like, Get Off My Lawn. And we will talk about how uniforms these days seem to be going away from the traditional look to something that we've never really seen before in an attempt to appeal to a younger, newer generation of fans, and whether or not we like that. But first, before we get into, some old man screaming at cloud content here, it's been a while, Paul, since I've seen your lovely face. Your face has gotten a little thinner and lighter in terms of...
I got a haircut, if that's what you're getting at.
That's where I'm getting. I got one too. I tried to go for a nice stylish do. Uh-huh. Tell me what's going on in the wonderful world of Lukas.
We are sort of easing nicely into summer here. Just this past weekend, my partner and I spent the weekend upstate with friends upstate, and it was actually the first time since the start of the pandemic that we spent a night anywhere other than here. Like, it's the first time we weren't sleeping in our own bed in about a year and a half. And that's how little traveling we've done. We don't have family nearby to stay with or anything like that. And so, we had really been very much in that bubble or pod or whatever you want to call it, here in New York City where we live. And so it was great to get away. And also a bit of news I have to announce, and we are recording this on Monday, but I believe it's going to go live, this episode, on Wednesday or Thursday. And by that time, UniWatch will have been announced as a new partner of Bulletin, which is the new newsletter platform that was rolled out in late June by Facebook. And they started with 12 really big name writers like Malcolm Gladwell and Dory Greenspan and Erin Andrews, who is a big name, not usually thought of as a big name writer, but she's writing for them. And this week they're rolling out 15 more writers, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of them. And so I'll be writing for that platform for Bolton, doing UniWatch content for them once a week. And that's in addition to my blog and all the other things, and not instead of. And that's very exciting. And I'm excited to be part of this new project, this new platform. And I hope Unified listeners will check out UniWatch on Bulletin, and they can do that at paullukas.bulletin.com.
That's awesome. That's exciting.
It is exciting.
The UniWatch world is expanding even further. UniWatch is getting bigger.
I should say, UniWatch got a little shout out on the air last night on ESPN2. And I have to say, I didn't even know this, but ESPN, sometimes when they do Sunday Night Baseball, they do a separate broadcast, a StatCast broadcast.
Yeah.
Where they, so I didn't even know that. And I guess they don't do it for every Sunday night baseball game, but for some of them. And so have you watched what does the StatCast broadcast entail? Just like a lot more analytics and things like that?
Yeah, it's a lot more of the new age, get off my lawn statistics out there, like, like WAR and VORP, and I don't quite understand it, but, yeah, they focus more on those rather than the traditional batting average RBIs.
Right. So that has a different broadcast. It's the same game, and it's, I guess, mostly the same camera crew, but it's a different set of broadcasters on mic talking about different aspects of the game. And at some point during Sunday night's Yankees Red Sox game, they gave a shout out to me and to UniWatch for an article I recently did on the turn ahead the clock 1999 futuristic uniforms, which you and I talked about in a recent episode. Yep. And so that was kind of fun. It's always nice. I'm sure you've had that experience too, getting a little shout out on the air. And it's nice that we have friends in high places sometimes, basically.
It's a weird feeling because for the most part, and I don't know if you're the same way, but 99% of my day, I feel like a regular fan, at least in my head. And I'm sitting down watching the game like everyone else. And then suddenly I'm being included in this world that I don't feel like I'm a part of, right? Like, wait, why are you talking about me? Go back to the game.
And invariably, I never hear it myself. Like, I was not watching the StatCast broadcast. It's always, people on social media, or I get, suddenly I get like 4 emails saying they just mentioned you on the air or whatever. And that, that's, I'm glad somebody's paying attention because I wasn't watching.
I find whenever I'm watching, like, it's only maybe happened once where I've actually heard myself on there, but they'll be talking about something where they could very easily mention me, but when I'm actually watching or listening, they don't.
Right. Like sometimes they'll bring up uniforms or logos, and you're like, oh, I just wrote about, like, come on. Like,
they're going to say it. They're going to mention me. How could they not? How could they mention that instead of me?
Well, until we get those sweet gigs as play-by-play and color announcers ourselves, which, given the sterling banter that we have on this show right here, like, that offer should be coming any day now.
Right. If they can do a StatCast broadcast, they can do a uniform broadcast.
I hadn't thought, because they do, there's also like betting broadcasts, right? Yeah. Where it's all like odds driven. And so, yeah, imagine if there was like strictly that would be kind of awesome. Actually.
Would it just be you and I repeating ourselves though for 9 innings?
There's so much more. Like, oh my God, there'd be like so many little details.
Check out the pine tar on that guy's helmet.
Yeah. Oh, I think he might have changed his shoelaces since his last at bat.
Can we do a replay? Can we go back to that?
Can you get me how did he look in like two innings ago?
We can give his stats based on different types of uniform and equipment and jersey type. Well, okay. Might be onto something here, ESPN.
I think you have lurched into like a completely brilliant idea.
All right. Start working on that one.
So how about you, Howard? How is your summer going?
Well, I'm going to quickly wrap up the saga of me getting vaccinated because it's done. I got my second shot about a month ago. I'm ready to go out and play again, I guess. And I went out for a dinner with friends at their house, and we actually went inside for a little bit. I gave one of my friends a hug. It was a very unusual feeling, but it's so good to be back a little bit. I'm taking baby steps. I'm not diving all the way in, but what I'm really looking forward to is seeing my Toronto Blue Jays again.
Because they are coming back.
They're coming back. They just announced it the other day. And you and I talked about this in a chat maybe about a month ago, and how I don't even consider the Rogers Center or Skydome a current stadium right now. Like, it feels like a stadium from yesteryear. So I'm saying to Paul, I'm like, is this like seeing the Mets back at Shea to you? Like, is this what I'm feeling? But just to walk in those doors again and see the big green carpet and the big scoreboard, and to hear all those sounds and smell all those wonderful smells you get at the baseball game, I'm really looking forward to. Capping it at 15,000 fans a game right now. It's going to be tricky to get in, but just at least one game. I got to go to at least one game this year.
So you don't have tickets yet?
No, I don't think they've started selling them yet. So everything's happening really quickly. I am part of a season ticket package with about 10 other friends. So in a normal season, I end up going to 5 games. So in this ultra condensed 2-month season, maybe I'll get to 1. I don't know.
What has it been like? And actually, I apologize for not having asked this sooner. This is something we should have discussed in an earlier episode. What has it been like rooting for and watching your favorite team not playing at home, and playing in their home uniforms and being the home team, batting second, having last licks, all that, but not being at home? And I mean, you did that, I guess, with the Raptors as well. It's not a Blue Jays specific thing, but Toronto is the only city that's had to really experience this. And so as a fan, have you felt sort of separated from, or just, is there like a wall between you and the team, or does it feel not as intimate, never to see the familiar home background of the home stadium and all of that?
It does feel a little strange. I mean, last year the Jays made the playoffs. They probably shouldn't have as the 10th seed team in the league, but it didn't feel like that season ever happened. Like, going to the playoffs is a big deal for a Blue Jays fan. And it happened, and it was as if, I wasn't there to experience any of the moments, the sound of the crowd. To me, that's the excitement of a playoff run. And we never got that. Fortunately, the Blue Jays have been great at redesigning the background of their, in Dunedin and Buffalo to make it look like the Sky Dome, right? It feels like, the same color padding, the same type of advertisements, which is part of it. Mm-hmm. That, to me, like, sometimes I've walked in and I looked at a highlight and I go, is that Rogers Center or is that Salem Field? It's
wow. So it was actually like a reasonably good simulation.
Right. I mean, like, at a quick glance, like, if I sat there and studied it. The one thing I really didn't enjoy was hearing the fans, especially down in Florida, always cheering for the road team, which was a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, the home field advantage isn't quite what it once was, huh?
No. And in Buffalo, they were great, right? They cheered for the Jays almost every game. When the Yankees were in town, they became Yankee fans. But the Buffalo fans really embraced the Blue Jays. You see in the background fans wearing Jays gear, and that was nice to see. And I wouldn't be opposed whatsoever. In fact, I'd encourage it if the Blue Jays could play one series a year in Buffalo going forward, just as a thank you.
Wow.
Right? Like, not against the Yankees. Okay. But one series a year, call it the friendship series. I don't know, make up a name. And, I would love that. That would be my way of saying thank you to Buffalo for hosting our team and cheering for our team for the last 2 years.
I had a UniWatch reader, who attended one of the games. He lives in Buffalo or in the Buffalo area. And he said, here's my chance to see big league baseball in Buffalo. And he went, and he said the most interesting aspect of the experience was that there were no ads or anything between innings.
Oh, really?
Because the Jays' usual advertisers, would be Canadian brands and Canadian companies, but nobody in Buffalo is going to be. And so it was quiet. He said it was like going to a ball game closer to what he remembered as a kid. That there wasn't as much sort of nonstop barrage of advertising.
Yeah. And, what did they do was it just like music?
Music, yeah. They had music, and they had some promotions, but not as much. And he said he hadn't thought about it in advance, but that as soon as they reached I guess the end of the top of the first or whatever, when they were between innings, he realized, wait, what's different? Oh. And then he really sort of embraced it for the rest of the game, and it was like paying attention to just, how nice this is without all the ads and all the promotion.
Right. Or the in-stadium host.
To be at the ballpark and talking to the person sitting next to you. And so that was kind of nice. But aside from that, he said also just everything was really good. He said it was a great experience.
Well, again, thank you to people in Buffalo for taking care of my team for 2 years. I think we have 3 games left in Buffalo, and then that's it. Mm-hmm. Hosting the Red Sox. That series will be over by the time this episode airs. So,
right.
Thanks so much, Buffalo. Thanks for taking care of my Jays. And I really hope we'll be back to say thank you one day. But let's move on to uniform stuff.
And speaking of the Jays,
yes,
we watched the Major League Baseball All-Star Game last week, and one of the many odd things about it and surprising things that were not announced in advance was that the Blue Jays players suddenly had the Canadian flag on the chest of their jerseys. And
surprise,
I know
surprise.
It had been a sore point with you that they had to wear the American flag because all the jerseys had not a true American flag. It was like a two-color, not a true red, white, and blue American flag. But they did get the full-color Canadian flag. Did you hear anything about that? Did you know prior to the game that was going to happen?
No, not at all. I turned on the game and there it was. I think because there was a lot of Blue Jays featured on the pregame stuff up here. Mm-hmm. So I guess I saw it maybe about an hour before the rest of the U.S. saw it. But that was nice, but it really seems like it shouldn't have had to happen in the first place, right? Like, doesn't it seem like somebody wasn't thinking?
Yeah. And a lot of people weren't thinking clearly, I think, about the All-Star Game. And so obviously we haven't said it out loud yet, but any baseball fan knows that this was the first time that both teams wore league-specific All-Star uniforms rather than wearing their regular team uniforms. And I feel like we may have talked about this in the last episode. There's two separate issues here. And the first one is, do you stick with the players wearing their regular team uniforms, or do you go with, American and National League uniforms? And then the second question is, well, if you've decided to go with league uniforms, is it a good design or a bad design? Yeah. And to me, you don't even get to that second question personally, because like having all the players wear their individual team uniforms is what made the baseball All-Star Game so special and unique, and no other league does it except the NBA dabbled with it for a few years in the late 90s, but they didn't stick with it. And baseball's really the only sport it works in because you don't have the offensive and defensive teams on the same side. You don't have all the players on the field of play or the court or the ice all at once. So you can get away with having a bit of a jumble of uniforms, and that wouldn't work in football. It wouldn't work in hockey. And that to me is part of what made the baseball All-Star Game so much more, not just visually interesting, but it always made me feel more special as a fan. Mm-hmm. Like to see my favorite player from my favorite team wearing the same uniform I root for during the season. Mm-hmm. And I've never felt that way about the Pro Bowl or the NHL All-Star. I mean, I'm happy to see my favorite players, from my favorite teams, but there's not that same connection. Yeah. And I always thought that was one of the great things about the baseball All-Star Game. And I'm not saying anything new here. Not only have I said it before, but I feel like everybody's said it before, that they've said it a lot in the last month or so, leading up to this All-Star Game. I heard almost nobody, like maybe literally two people on social media who said, "Oh, I really like what they're doing. I think this new way is the better way." It seemed to me to be an almost universal thumbs down to the approach they took. But it's possible. Certainly, people who follow me on social media and who I interact with may already be predisposed to agree with me on something like this. So maybe that's not a fair sample. What did you experience, and what did you hear, and what sort of feedback were you aware of?
Similar to yours, like 99% negative, the odd person. I mean, now and then you get someone who disagrees with the majority just to disagree with the majority. So I'm not sure if they truly felt this way. Some people like the idea of new uniforms for the All-Star Game, league specific, but just hated that design. It was a bit of a mess of a design. It was a terrible design.
That to me is like the second question. If they had come up with a good design, well, maybe. Then you would have a lose-lose. You'd have the lose-neutral or something.
Right. It might have been a little more tolerable. And you go back to, and I'm certain I've mentioned this on past episodes, where, seeing your team represented on the national stage, international stage. And, we're going back to me being a Blue Jays fan here. My first time ever, a Blue Jay wins All-Star Game MVP, and he's not wearing a Blue Jays uniform. And that was like, of course, imagine him on that center stage holding up the All-Star Game MVP trophy, wearing that, I guess it would have been the gray, the gray Toronto uniform. That would have been amazing with that blue.
That killed you a little bit?
A little bit. It made it feel a little less special. It made it feel like, oh, my guy won MVP, but not for my team. you
Right.
know,
Right.
um,
As a Mets fan, we only had the Mets only had one player in the game, Taijuan Walker.
mhm.
Now Taijuan Walker actually pitched for the Blue Jays last year,
Good,
for
yeah.
part of last year, and was with, I think, Seattle before that, and was signed by the Mets during the off season. I think a lot of baseball fans, unless you're like a serious fan, don't even know Taijuan Walker is with the Mets. He's
Right.
not their best pitcher this year. Jacob deGrom is, who's having this otherworldly season, but deGrom skipped the All-Star game, so they took Taijuan Walker. He's really been under the radar, between playing for 3 teams in a short span and being overshadowed by deGrom. And I was happy to see him selected for the game because he has had a good season. I was happy to see him in the game. He pitched the bottom of the 6th. But it was such a drag, like seeing him in that unit. Like there was no sense of connection that this is not how I'm used to seeing him. This is not the uniform that I want, that I'm proud to have other fans see him in. And then again, most fans probably don't even know he pitches for the Mets this year, or many fans don't. And there's almost nothing on his uniform that would indicate that. Like the Mets branding is so downplayed in this design that they used for the All-Star game. And it just took the fun and the sense of pride and connection in my team and in the player who I want to root for. It just took that all out of the equation. And it was a drag.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I found maybe by the 3rd or 4th inning, what I love about the All-Star game, there's many things. I'm uniform focused, but by the 5th or 6th inning, you start getting these middle relievers who made the All-Star team, guys that you probably have never heard of. And I love watching 6th, 7th inning, and there's this Kansas City Royal or a Tampa Bay Ray, a guy you've never heard of, wearing this uniform on the big stage again. That normally wouldn't be, right? Forget about my own team, but these other guys I've never heard of, and seeing them represent their team. And I'm thinking of the smaller markets, seeing it.
Right. If you're in a smaller market, or if your team just kind of stinks, and I can say growing up, the Mets really stunk for much of my childhood. And there was always only one player in the game. There was one Met, and I was always so excited for his moment, when he got introduced in the pregame introductions, and then that moment when he finally got to pinch hit or whoever it would be, Lee Mazzilli or John Stearns or whatever. And yeah, that made a difference to me to hey, we actually exist. We actually produced one decent player. And also one thing that couldn't happen this year, and I'm surprised you didn't mention this because you've told me privately, one of your favorite things is when there's a mound conference.
Yeah.
And all the different caps.
Yeah.
All the different color caps.
Yep. We lost that again.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I'm surprised and disappointed that they went this route, especially because to me, all the other leagues and sports, their All-Star games are basically like clown shows, not just in terms of the uniforms, but because nobody even tries. There's no, in the Pro Bowl, there's no hard physical contact. You can't rush the kicker or the punter. In the hockey All-Star game, the NHL All-Star game, there's very little hitting. Yep. There's no defense in these games. The scores tend to be really, really high because the nature of those games, to play hard would be to risk injury. Mm-hmm. But in baseball All-Star game, the pitchers still throw as hard as they can. In fact, some of them throw harder because if you're a starter, you don't have to pace yourself over 6 or 7 innings in the All-Star game. You can just air it all out in that one inning that you have. And the level of play is really high. Mm-hmm. And I felt like the combination of those two things, the level of play and the uniforms, really set baseball's All-Star game apart from the other sports All-Star games. And this supposedly is an era when baseball is worried about its future, worried about being overtaken by other sports. And here's a genuine point of difference, something they can point to as something, hey, this big showcase, as you say, Chris, this international showcase, we do it differently and better than the other sports. And instead, I feel like by watering down the uniforms, they're saying, we're just going to treat it like a clown show like all the other sports do. And I find that really disappointing. And especially because they have the home run derby.
Yeah.
Why not, like, if you want to have some kind of costume or league specific uniform, use that for the derby, man. And save the team uniforms for the game. And now instead it's the other way around.
Well, hey, at least you get to see your Mets win the championship in the home run derby.
Yeah, Pete Alonso 2 years in a row. That is true. I'm glad he wore a Mets uniform for that. I wish he could hit just a few more home runs in the regular season instead of just in the derby. But that's another story. But yeah, it seemed like it was a real missed opportunity or a misguided direction. And supposedly, there even though there's been so much negative response to it, not just from us, but there were a lot of stories about how social media was just awash with negative reaction. That they're going to do it again next year. That they're going to stick with it. And I don't know if it's too late to change that, compared to like a team changing its uniforms. Like once that process starts, you really can't stop it. But for something like an All-Star Game, I'd like to think that they might rethink this. I don't know.
They make money, Paul. That's all that matters.
Do they? How many of these things did they sell?
I went looking for one, not to buy, just out of curiosity. And, a lot of them, they said were sold out. So
yeah, but you don't know how many they made.
That's a fair point.
Sold out doesn't necessarily mean anything if you start with really low inventory, and especially because even though they never really confirmed it, these were the designs that were supposed to be worn in Atlanta, right?
I mean, they clearly were.
Yeah, with the floral trim on the cuffs was like the sleeve cuffs was the Georgia State flower or something like that.
And the colors were the same as the All-Star Game logo.
Yeah. So they may not have made very many,
right.
For retail. And so to say it's sold out, or I think I saw in one article, essentially sold out, whatever that means. So I don't know. And how does that compare to sales from previous years and, for the BP jersey? So the mere fact that something sold out to me doesn't necessarily mean anything.
I'd love to get those numbers, but they won't share them with anybody.
Yeah.
You would think that if they were happy with or proud with the numbers, they would shout it out from the rooftops.
You would think that.
Look how many we sold. Perhaps they're a little embarrassed. I don't know. But they're sticking with it. I mean, this is the new trend in All-Star Game uniforms anyways, right? Like, focus on the team. I guess because like the NHL and the NBA and now Major League Baseball, they now wear the team logo on the front of the All-Star Game jersey rather than the conference logo or the division. Yeah. And that makes sense, right? Because I'm more inclined perhaps to purchase something that has a Toronto logo on the front than, the Metropolitan Division logo on the front, there's no tie there. And I remember, I was talking to, someone who worked in retail for Major League Baseball, asking, hey, have you ever bought an All-Star Game jersey? I'm starting to think now this might have been testing the waters.
You were the focus group.
This was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, I kind of like the look of the BP jerseys, but I'm never going to buy one. And it's just me because I think my team plays in a league called the American League. So I have I have no desire to wear a jersey that it just says American across the front, right? Like,
right. You could be the Canadian American or the American Canadian.
The American, yeah. So I apologize though if I led to what we have now. But yet it's got to clearly sell better, right? Like, and that's the focus. That's what they want. And I'm sure these are all, I was going to say they're all Nike, but the NHL is Adidas. So some sort of unified unified strategy there. They've figured out something. And this is the world we live in, Paul. You and I are both getting super old, I think, is what's happening.
Well, before we talk about that, before we go down.
This was me trying to gently segue into it.
But before we do that, do you have some friends of ours who you want to share some news about?
Yeah, well, I have 2 friends of ours. Yeah. We're very popular. First, I'm going to talk about Homefield Apparel, and we've talked about them many times in the past just because they're so great. This episode of Unified is brought to you in part by Homefield Apparel. Are you bored with all the cookie-cutter t-shirts for your favorite college sports teams? Well, Homefield Apparel, a premier brand out of Indianapolis, offers incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college sports designs. So you won't look like everyone else wearing that same Nike t-shirt. Homefield combs through historic collections to find unique logos, mascots, and other graphics, and then uses those graphics to make thoughtful designs for schools as large as the University of Alabama and as small as a Division III school like Hope College. You can check them out at homefieldapparel.com and get 15% off your first order with the checkout code UNIFIED. That's homefieldapparel.com. Use checkout code UNIFIED for 15% off. That's friend number one, Paul.
Who's our second friend, Chris?
Our second friend is Streaker Sports. And if you are looking for really unique sports apparel, Streaker Sports has dug deep into those archives to bring back some incredible defunct team logos. They've even created entire defunct league collections. Every couple of weeks, they release more teams and leagues. So if you're a fan of sports history, they are certainly a fun brand to follow. If there's a team they don't have, they have a fan-submitted section so you can get your team's tee made, and they'll throw you a free tee if they bring it to life. They also have collections celebrating sports culture, including a licensed Miracle on Ice collection and apparel from movies such as Slapshot, Caddyshack, and Major League. They even have the only officially licensed wiffle ball apparel and just dropped an all-new collection for the summer. Paul knows the guys at Streaker Sports. They've advertised on UniWatch and have even asked for his advice on how to handle problematic older logos that don't fit with today's cultural sensibilities. So Paul can certainly vouch for them as great people with great products. You can check them out at streakersports.com, and for a limited time only for Unified podcast listeners, use the checkout code UNIFIED to get 20% off your order. That is streakersports.com. If you use that checkout code UNIFIED, you will get 20% off your order. That's a good deal. That's a good price. You know those folks, eh, Paul?
I do know those folks. Pete Lucchese at Streaker Sports, really good guy. Really, really good guy. And very, very soft t-shirts, I have to say. Like those tri-blend
that's
companies have. Yeah,
that is one of the best qualities in a t-shirt. Soft.
Yeah, very cool.
And as I get older, stretchiness. I appreciate stretchiness a little bit more.
Now, who said you're getting older, Chris? Is that a theme for our episode today?
Well,
because I think it is a theme. That like in the All-Star Game and in the City Connect uniforms and in so many of the uniforms we see today, the goal clearly, and the teams and leagues say this, it's not like a secret. They say, we are trying to appeal to a younger fan. Sometimes they say they're trying to appeal to a younger non-fan. Yeah. Like somebody who doesn't even care so much about the sport, but who might just find the design interesting, the uniform design. And so my question for you, Chris, is do you think, or for both of us really, is this a smart way to help for teams and leagues to help grow their audiences and grow their sports? Is it a foolish way to alienate older fans? Is it both? Is it neither? Or somewhere in between? And the reason I thought this would be a particularly good topic for us is that there's a decent spread in our ages. I'm 57, you are 38, and you have kids. Yeah. So between the two of us and your kids who you're in touch with, and you have a sense of their sensibilities, I feel like there's a range of opinions and perspectives here. And obviously any business wants to stay current, stay relevant. But do some of these teams and leagues risk using these designs almost like a wedge that divides generations rather than what's the role that sports has traditionally played, which is to unite generations?
Right. And I mean, they don't really try to hide it, right? Like I talked to the Boston Red Sox and they came right out and said, look, we understand a lot of our traditional fans aren't going to like this uniform, and this uniform ain't for them anyways, right? Like this is for the non-fan. This is for the younger fan. And to some extent, it worked a little bit. I noticed when the Red Sox came out with those yellow City Connect uniforms that, well, they were right. Every Red Sox fan hated them. But the people who liked them were the people who don't traditionally interact with me on social media. They were all people who didn't follow us. They were all people who, don't fit that stereotypical demographic for what a baseball fan is.
Uh-huh.
So,
well, are you speaking about people you've encountered specifically, or who you communicated with, or saw them
people who
uniforms in some way?
Yeah, like people who liked the City Connect uniforms, who were like, quote tweeting or retweeting or replying to the tweets, and I would go and check to see. You creep their profile, I guess, and you think, oh, they don't follow me, and oh, this is a younger person. This is someone who isn't a traditional baseball fan. Out of my own curiosity, well, okay, it looked like it worked a little bit, but I can't imagine that anybody is becoming a baseball fan because of this, right? It might make them stop and say, oh, look, the Red Sox have a fun yellow uniform, and then they're going to go on with their day. Right? Like they're not going to say, that's it, sign me up. I'm a Red Sox fan for life because they wore a yellow uniform for 2 games. That's not going to happen, right? That's you get some attention perhaps, but is that worth the risk, as you brought up in your question, of alienating your older fans? Now, the flip side of that is your older fans aren't going to abandon the team because they wore a yellow uniform for 2 games. However, it's a bit of
you can afford, like their support is sort of baked in, and you can afford to piss them off a little bit, and they'll
little bit.
And so that's sort of a cynical approach, but yeah.
But to an extent, right? You can't, like, if the Red Sox now trot out with, and I keep using the Red Sox as an example because they were first with City Connect, but this applies to any team in any sport. If you start trotting out your team in a different, fun, wacky uniform 162 times a year, you're going to lose some fans. You're going to lose some of the hardcore fans, right? Like they're not going to put up with that. There's so much loyalty built into, a color scheme, a logo.
That's why we do what we do for a living.
That's why we do. Exactly. Yeah. And, for a while when the Blue Jays switched to black and white, it was hard to feel any connection to that. There was no connection to that franchise. And the second they switched back to blue and white, the amount of fans that came back to that team and, oh, finally my team is back.
Yeah.
That's the power of a consistent brand. The brand doesn't even need to look good, right? It just needs to,
but at least it has to reflect the core values or core colors.
Yes,
or something.
Exactly. It just needs to get those feelings, the warm and fuzzies. I always talk about the warm and fuzzies, and that's what uniforms do, right? They bring back those memories of the passions of the good times in your life, good times in your team's life. And you forget all the bad stuff, and you just remember going to the game with your dad and seeing that uniform on the field. And suddenly nothing else matters. Right. But when the Red Sox wear yellow, Paul, I'm on a rant. Back off. When the Red Sox wear yellow, everything, hey. When the Red Sox wear yellow, all bets are off. Forget about it. When the Giants wear foggy uniforms, come on.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because one of my readers, a UniWatch reader named Michael Galante, I have this email here on my phone. I'm going to read it. He posted something. He sent it to me and then posted it on UniWatch. When I wrote about the Giants fog-themed City Connect uniforms, and he said, it was like the day after those were unveiled. He wrote, I dropped off my 11-year-old son and his 2 buddies this morning at baseball camp in New Jersey. For the 12-minute car ride, 3 11-year-old boys from New Jersey talked about nothing else but the uniforms of a team from San Francisco and how they compare to the baseball uniforms from teams in Boston, Phoenix, 2 from Chicago, and Miami. In other words, all of the City Connect teams. Again, these are New Jersey kids who are normally all Yankees or all Mets fans talking about uniforms of teams they do not root for from faraway places. And so I thought that was an interesting insight. And I don't have kids. I do not interact with a lot of kids, especially in that age range, like 11-year-old, 12-year-old. And so I was intrigued by that, to hear that this actually worked a little, at least it's a very small sample size, but it's an interesting sample of kids not from any of those cities, none of those City Connect cities, and that they were into these uniforms and they were talking about them amongst themselves, that it was like a thing to be chattering about. And I had to sort of grudgingly say, maybe it's working a little bit. And your kids are younger. How old are your kids?
5 and 8.
So they are not now. That your son is 8, right? And so is he at the stage yet where he really has strong tastes in uniforms? Like at 8 years old, I'm not sure I did.
Well, you have to keep in mind that he has my DNA.
Yes.
And he lives in a house where we talk about logos and uniforms all the time.
Right.
So, it's not quite the, what's the word I'm looking for? The constant.
Yes. Yeah. He's a slightly biased source right. Yeah.
So, but he's certainly interested in it. He always wants to know what's new, what's coming out. And he typically loves everything he sees. He just wants something new. He wants something to think about, so perhaps you're right. Maybe they're onto something here, but does that translate into fandom? Does that translate into dollars, which is what I'm assuming is the core component here? Like my son is already a big baseball fan. Those kids from New Jersey were already baseball fans, it sounds like. So are we really converting non-baseball fans? Are we converting kids into following? Like these kids aren't going to become Giants fans because of these uniforms, I don't think. And even if they do, I don't know if that's necessarily Major League Baseball's goal, right? They would prefer fans stay fans within their own local market, ideally.
Maybe.
Well, it translates to ticket sales, which is good.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But it is it's an intriguing thought, and especially because we seem to know that younger kids, younger people have a shorter attention span, people who've grown up with the internet. And so when you talk about, first when you say, well, if a team changes its uniform every game, like maybe that's what some people want. Like they get bored with, seeing the same uniform three games in a row. And when you talk about your son saying he just wants something new, he wants something new. And that all seems of a piece here. Like, that maybe that's, what the fan of tomorrow wants. I don't know. I've been trying to remember how I felt, in the mid 70s when the Astros came out with the Tequila Sunrise, because that was sort of the equivalent of that in that era of, a design that totally broke the mold, pushed the envelope, whatever cliche you want to use. No baseball uniform had ever looked like that before. And also Bill Veeck was doing the crazy stuff with the White Sox then, the untucked leisure suit thing. And I'm trying to remember what I thought. And did I think it was ridiculous? I don't know if it was, in those days, apparel sales and merchandise jerseys were not a thing. So they weren't necessarily trying to gin up retail sales, but presumably they were trying to appeal to, expand their fan base and do something new and different. I don't remember what I thought, honestly. I just accepted that new uniforms came along and that they were what they were. Was there some equivalent of this in your childhood and, like some uniform, not necessarily in baseball, in any sport, that broke the mold? And do you recall how you reacted to it?
Well, keep in mind, I grew up in the 90s.
Right,
so,
right. It's different era.
Yeah. So but the entire decade it seemed like there were no rules, right? Like anything could change.
Right, because sublimation they came up with the sublimation manufacturing process, and that really had an effect on the NBA and the NHL.
Right. So, but when I point to the Detroit Pistons going from red, white, and blue to teal with a flaming horse on the chest, that's not necessarily like, the equivalent, but to me, it's an example of how nothing was sacred, right? Like the idea of a team, throwing out its history to do something new and crazy. So it was a different era where anything like that seemed possible.
And how did you, as a you were as a teenager, say, like in that era, how did you feel about it?
It was exciting because I loved logos and uniforms, and, there was no outlet for that back then. So it was, okay, let's see what team's changing this year, right? Like what crazy thing are we going to see on the ice for hockey, for example? And, you'd have to wait till the draft to see the new jerseys. That's the only time you'd know. But I was always very excited by it. And
well, maybe that might be the story, right? I mean, you were a young fan who found excitement in this, and maybe in that regard it works, and that we get set in our ways as we get older, but maybe every generation gets to have its moment for whether it's Tequila Sunrise or the Detroit Pistons or City Connect. I don't know.
Yeah. And every generation 20 years from now gets to throw back to that.
Well, I think that's something I wanted to bring, which is that over the last decade or so, the designs that seem across all sports, not just baseball, the designs that seem to have pushed things the most have not aged well and have not lasted. I mean, the teams have moved away from them. Like in the NFL, for example, the Buccaneers and the Browns came out almost at the same time with designs that were clearly designed to appeal to younger, hipper, not traditionalist fans. And those uniforms not only lasted only 5 or 6 years each, but the teams didn't just change them. They went back to what they had before. Like it was, they just turned, they did a do-over and said, never mind, forget we did that. We're just going to go back to where we were before. So it's not like they moved forward or even laterally. They just moved backwards away from those newfangled designs. Also in the NFL, the Jaguars with the two-tone helmet, right? Like things that we were all told at the time that if you didn't like them, oh, you're just stick in the mud. You're an old man, shaking your fist at the cloud. Okay, boomer, or whatever stupid cliche it might be. But it turns out those were all bad designs that a lot of people didn't like, not just traditionalists. And the teams ended up going to something much more conservative. In the NBA, the Atlanta Hawks, same thing, had that crazy sort of quilted looking uniform.
Remember the green? They had green.
And the neon green, right?
Yeah.
And look at the Hawks now. They look like a team out of the late 60s or early 70s. It's just like a very straightforward conservative word mark. And I don't mean that in a negative way. They look fine. Yeah. But it's a complete 180 from what they had been trying to do 6 or 7 years earlier. And anyone who disliked that design 6 or 7 years earlier was told, oh, you're just not with it. You don't get it. It's for the youth. It's for the youth. But it turns out that in a lot of these cases, the youth, or I guess not enough of the youth, did not embrace these designs. And so I'm very interested to see what happens with baseball. And because it's easy to say like, oh, you just don't get it, or oh, it's not for the 50-year-old, it's for the 50-year-old's kid, But I don't know. Design, there is still such a thing as real design values and issues of legibility and color coordination and all these things that I feel is often lacking in a lot of these uniforms.
Remember the Arizona Diamondbacks, right? How that was going to be the future of the baseball uniform. And even like the season after, when we talked to the Diamondbacks for a story, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this is what every team is going to do in a couple of years. We're all going to."
You're talking about the
gradients
5 or 6 years ago with the with the snake skin and the charcoal road uniform and the weird like bloody ankle.
That's right. The Kurt Schilling special, yeah.
And they all of the new things they got rid of.
Almost immediately, right? Like the gradients on the pants were gone after that first season even.
Yeah.
But like these examples that you say, like the Buccaneers, the Jaguars, the Browns, you go to hockey, the New York Islanders. What this shows you is that like, it makes you appreciate that original design a little bit more, right? Like it almost cements that original design now as the design you love the most, right? So with Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans, it was either you liked Bucko Bruce, the creamsicle uniforms, or you liked the pirate flag uniforms, the ones they won the Super Bowl with.
Right.
When they went to those crazy alarm clock uniforms in 2015, 2016, and then now, okay, whatever we switch back to now, that's our forever uniform. That's our iconic look. So what you saw was, okay, I could see how bad this uniform gets. The pirate flag uniform, the Browns uniform, the Jaguars. We see how bad this can be. It makes us appreciate that previous design so much more. And we want that design now forever. Never touch it again. Never change it again.
Right. And we may be seeing that same dynamic in play for teams like the Jets.
Yep.
The Rams, I think, the Falcons, all of which have very newfangled, very quote unquote youth oriented uniforms that I don't think are going over well with the fan base. And I suspect that they're going to also sort of beat a hasty retreat, aesthetically and design wise. We'll see.
But on the flip side of that, we have to acknowledge the teams that have done this and have done so successfully. And
who might those be? Which teams?
There's one that I can think of.
What team is that?
I'm sure there's more, but there's only one. The Seattle Seahawks.
Uh-huh.
Right? They went super modern. We all thought this is nuts. It's not going to last. And then they doubled down on it.
I still don't like it personally, but they have.
I don't like it.
I give them credit for staying the course, I guess. I still don't particularly care for it.
Yeah.
But they have.
But they won a Super Bowl with it now. It's now their look, and they're never going to go back to that 70s.
No, that is probably true. That is probably true. So let me get a prediction from you, if I may.
All right.
10 years from now, let's keep the prediction to baseball, because baseball is the sport that has been sort of the last to embrace this. You know, they're the last, and they're traditionally the most traditional, the slowest to change. 10 years from now, do you think baseball, Major League Baseball, is going to look more like City Connect overall? Like your typical, if you turn on a Major League Baseball game, is it going to be similar to when you turn on an NBA game where you don't recognize who's playing because it's different colors, you know, Red Sox and yellow or whatever it might be, where like there's such a carousel of revolving door of uniforms? Or is it going to be closer to, you know, the pendulum swinging back the other way and things being a little more standard, white at home, gray on the road, the occasional solid colored alternate?
I think what we're going to see within the next 10 years is baseball shifting towards that, and then shifting. And I think by the time 10 years comes around, 2031, we'll have already shifted back to a more traditional look. What I can't predict is, are they still going to be full button jerseys? Are they still going to, are there going to be ads on the sleeves? Who knows? Probably. But in terms of, I think we're still going to see, you know, your traditional white at home, maybe not gray on the road. I'm sure the Yankees will still be gray on the road, but you know, you might start seeing solid color on the road like the Padres are doing with their brown tops as the road jersey. But yeah, I think 5-6 years from now, it's going to be chaos.
So you're saying,
but then I think it's going
to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah. But I think 2031, 10 years from now, it's going to be worse than it is now, but it'll be better than it was along the way. So from the perspective of someone in 31, it'll be like, all right, we're back to normal. But from the perspective of someone from 21, it'll be like, what the heck happened? What did I miss? What about you?
I think that's that's about how I would have predicted it as well. I think that's a smart way of looking at it, that it's going to go down that road and then it's going to come back, but maybe not all the way back to where it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it feels like you and I have been through this before.
Yeah. Yeah. We've seen that
keeps repeating
a few times. That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
I'd like to tell you that this episode of Unified is brought to you, like literally brought to you, by Astroluxe Innovations. Astroluxe is our podcast host, and they also designed our website, unified.show, where we have our show notes, links, photos, and so on. When Chris and I wanted to do a podcast together, we knew we wanted to get started, but we had no idea actually how to get started. Astroluxe Innovations got us set up and has been helping us each step of the way. So if you're looking for fast, reliable, and affordable podcast hosting that comes with a sharp-looking, forward-facing website, get in touch with Astroluxe Innovations at Astroluxe.io. That's Astroluxe with an E at the end, ASTROLUXE.io. They'll make the whole process easy and understandable, so your podcast will stand out from the crowd. And make sure to let them know that you heard about them on Unified. Chris, do you have a question of the week, a question of the month for us?
I still think we need a question of the month theme song.
Oh, that's something to work on. Okay. That's, yes.
Question
that's our
of
assignment. That's our assignment for next week.
So I'm going to call it the Chicago Cardinals helmet this week or this month. I know that's not accurate, but why not? If I get a Vegas or a Raiders helmet, I could spin this into 3 or 4 or more different teams, I think.
The people who are listening to us on audio instead of watching the video find that compelling.
They love it. They love this stuff. And what it does is it drives them to want to look at the video version of this on youtube.com/sportslogos.
Chris is holding his Arizona/St. Louis/Chicago Cardinals helmet where he has all the questions that were submitted. And he's going to pull one out.
/Phoenix. Ready?
Yeah.
From people who responded to our Twitter feed, by the way, earlier this week. Thank you to everyone. Okay, this one comes from @JackHibbard34 on Twitter. Jack asks, who should be allowed to wear certain throwback uniforms, such as the Seattle Pilots or the Washington Senators? Should it be the actual franchise, such as the Brewers for the Pilots? Or should it be the new team in the new city, such as the Mariners for the Pilots? Paul.
That's a really good question. And I've actually gone back and forth on this, depending on the team or the franchise or the cities involved. I sort of think the Brewers and the Mariners should be allowed to wear Seattle Pilots throwbacks, not in the same game facing each other. Although actually home pilots versus road pilots would be kind of cool when you think about it. But, because of course the Brewers were the Seattle Pilots for 1 year, and that's part of their franchise history and part of their stats and their records. And, there were times I remember like growing up in the 70s, and looking at Brewers franchise records, and there was still like a few, like the team leader, the single season stolen base leader or whatever it was, I'm just making that up, was from 1969 when they were the Pilots, their all-time single season record. I don't think there are any Pilots now that hold any Brewers records, but it is part of their franchise history, and it's an interesting baseball history, and it's how the Brewers got their colors. The Brewers colors of blue and yellow were Pilots colors. So that all matters, and I don't want that to be forgotten. But of course, the Pilots also belong to the city of Seattle, and so I feel like the team that plays there now, Mariners, should be able to wear, and they have worn. But I think I know the Mariners have worn.
So the Brewers,
and the Brewers have as well. And so for some reason,
I think so. Yeah.
I have this image in my mind of Ichiro dressed in a Pilots throwback uniform, and so I know the Mariners did it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know that there has to be a rule about one team can and one team can't. In general, I like throwbacks. I like the history that they teach. I know it's a sore point for some teams and some fans in the NHL. Fans in Hartford hate it when the Carolina Hurricanes wear those Whalers throw. And for those watching on video, Chris has a Whalers. Is this why you have a Whalers jersey hanging in the background?
No, I just like the jersey, and it matches the colors of our logo. See?
Yeah, that's true. But that's like a sore point with those Hartford fans. But I kind of like being reminded that the Hurricanes used to be the Whalers and that they moved, and that's all part of sports history. And that I live in Brooklyn, and there are still people here who, not many, but there are still some people who grit their teeth about the Dodgers leaving. But the LA Dodgers should be able to wear a Brooklyn Dodgers throwback. It's the same franchise, and it's part of their history. So what was the other example he gave aside from Seattle?
Well, he mentioned, let's see, what about the Washington Senators? Like, should Texas Rangers wear the Senators, or?
The Twins were also the Senators.
Or the Twins, right? Yes.
That's a particularly thorny one because, there were 2 different Washington Senators and they both moved.
Yeah.
And then, should the Nationals be able to wear Washington Senators? I think the Nationals should be, and they have, was it last season? They wore Expos throwbacks.
That was 19.
The year before, yeah.
It was the year they won the World Series. So I'm claiming that as a victory for Montreal.
Right. And the great thing there, of course, was that Max Scherzer, like on his off day, like on his throw day between starts, actually in a bullpen session wore the Expos throwback uniform because he knew he was going to be wearing it when his turn came up for the actual
So
game.
wanted to be ready.
He likes to simulate game conditions as much as possible. And that was just hilarious. But yeah, to me, there's no wrong time to wear a throwback. I'm all for any team wearing a throwback. What do you think?
I mean, generally I'm with you on this. Any throwback is a good throwback, as long as there is some connection, right? It doesn't make sense to see, like the Dodgers wearing a New York Giants throwback.
Right.
But,
I don't mean this willy-nilly, but as long as there's some connection, I don't know.
Some connection.
You need to say this connection is more valid than that connection.
Now, I think there are limits to, what should apply when it comes to if the current market can wear it. Like, I don't think the New York Mets should wear Brooklyn Dodgers uniforms.
Right.
I don't think the New York Mets should wear New York Giants uniforms, for example, aside from the cap. That's fine.
Right. But they have, actually, right? The Mets did that.
They did. Did they? I thought San Francisco won.
Giant NY. The reason I remember that was the game David Wright got beamed and was out for a long time. But it was like an early like turn of the century New York Giants.
It didn't say Giants across the front.
No, it had NY. It said NY, but it was a New York Giants.
I think back to when Atlanta played in Milwaukee for the first time after interleague play started.
Yes,
and both teams wore Braves uniforms.
Yes, that was right. That was because the Brewers wore Milwaukee Braves throwbacks.
Yeah.
But Braves just wore their regular Braves uniforms. And so it was Braves versus Braves. Yeah, that was a weird one.
That to me, that's fun, but it doesn't make sense to see, you're looking at Brewers players wearing Braves uniforms and practically, very similar uniform and logo style. So I think that's where I draw the line. If you're in the market, don't wear a throwback that looks like, if the team kept the identity, don't do that. So like, say one day the Montreal Expos come back. At that point, I'd say Washington, you don't get to wear Expos throwbacks anymore.
Right.
But if Montreal gets another team and they don't call them the Expos, it's fair game. Both markets get to use it.
Either the new Montreal team or the Nationals.
Or Washington. Yeah. And that'd be fun for Washington to troll Montreal fans and wear the getting all sorts of fun stuff there. But that's where I draw the line. If the identity still exists out there in the league, still active, then no. But if it's gone, I'd rather see the Hurricanes wear Whalers uniforms than to never see Whalers uniforms ever again.
Right.
And I know that's sore to Whalers fans, but that uniform's too good to be ignored and to be hung up in a closet gathering dust. Wear it, wear that logo, wear that uniform. I'm sorry. Hopefully you get a team again one day and then they'll take it away from Carolina, the uniforms, not the team. And then you can enjoy it. But until then, so that's the answer to that question for me. It's very dependent. But overall, as you say, any throwback is a good throwback.
Yeah. That was a great question. So thank you for that. And
thank you at Jack Hibbard 34. Thank you for that.
Keep those questions coming. And we'll deal with another question next episode. And I say that because we have come to the end of this episode. So, Chris, I'm going to take us out, if that's okay.
Sure. Where are we going?
Well, I just say that Unified is a joint production of UniWatch and SportsLogos.Net. Our producer, editor is the great Chris Fratterigo. Show notes for this episode are available at our website, unified.show. You can follow us on Twitter at UnifiedCast. The Unified logo is by Brian Gundell. Our theme music is by Chuck Rios. If you're listening to us on audio, you can also see video versions of all our episodes at youtube.com/sportslogos. The animation at the start of our videos is by Michael Princip. To submit a question for our question of the week or month, as the case might be, or to inquire about advertising or anything else, email us at info@unified.show. If you like our show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you consume your podcasts. And that is it for this episode. We're sticking to a monthly schedule throughout the summer. So stay well, and we will see you sometime in the middle of August. Chris, take care.
Bye-bye. Yes, you too, Paul. See you in August.